Chris Talley was 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, he thought he had the perfect marriage. Then he watched his wife of 7 years drug his evening tea while he stood in the hallway outside their kitchen, and everything he believed about his life shattered like glass. Chris worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, pulling in around $85,000 a year, decent money, enough to afford their 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood and maintain a comfortable lifestyle. His wife Jennifer was a real estate agent who'd been riding the recent housing boom to impressive commission checks. On paper, they were the picture of suburban success. In reality, Chris had been living with a stranger. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening in late November. Chris had come home early from work with a migraine, something that had been happening more frequently over the past 2 months. He'd told Jennifer he was leaving the office around 3 o'clock, but traffic was lighter than expected, and he arrived home by 3:30 instead of his usual 4:15. He'd parked in the driveway as always, fumbled with his keys at the front door, and stepped into the quiet house. That's when he heard Jennifer's voice coming from the kitchen, low and urgent. I know, she was saying, but it's taking longer than we thought. He's not stupid. I have to be careful. Chris froze in the entryway, his briefcase still in his hand. Something in her tone made his skin prickle with unease. He moved silently down the hallway, keeping close to the wall, until he could see into the kitchen through the partially open door. Jennifer stood with her back to him, her phone pressed to her ear. On the counter beside her sat Chris's favorite mug, the navy blue one with "World's Best Analyst" printed on the side that she'd given him for his birthday 3 years ago. Steam rose from it. She'd already made his tea. The pills work perfectly, Jennifer continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He's out cold every night by 8:30. I just need a few more weeks to get everything in place, and then we can move forward with the plan. Chris's heart hammered against his rib cage. Pills? What pills? He watched, unable to move, as Jennifer ended the call and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, orange prescription bottle, shook 2 white tablets into her palm, and dropped them into Chris's tea. She stirred it carefully, tapped the spoon on the rim of the mug, and placed it on the kitchen table where Chris always sat when he got home from work. The migraine that had sent Chris home early suddenly felt like a blessing and a curse. A blessing because he'd discovered this before whatever plan Jennifer had could come to fruition. A curse because the woman he'd loved since college, the woman he'd built a life with, was drugging him. Chris backed away from the kitchen as quietly as he'd approached, his mind racing. He slipped out the front door, closed it silently, and sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to control his breathing and figure out what to do next. Finally, he started the engine, pulled out of the driveway, and drove around the block. He parked 2 streets over and called Jennifer. Hey, honey, he said, forcing his voice to sound normal despite the rage and fear coursing through him. I'm leaving work now. Should be home in about 30 minutes. This headache is killing me. Oh no, poor baby, Jennifer cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy that now made his stomach turn. I'll make you some tea. That usually helps, right? You're the best, Chris said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. See you soon. He sat in his car for exactly 25 minutes, watching the clock on his dashboard and thinking. Then he drove home, parked in the driveway, and walked through the front door like a man who suspected nothing. If you enjoy stories about betrayal and shocking family secrets, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one. And tell me where you are watching from. Jennifer greeted him at the door with a kiss on the cheek and a sympathetic smile. Your tea's ready, sweetie. Why don't you go sit down? You look terrible. Thanks, Jen, Chris said, accepting the mug she handed him. The navy blue ceramic felt heavy in his hands, weighted with more than just liquid. You always take such good care of me. He settled into his usual spot at the kitchen table while Jennifer bustled around preparing dinner. Chris raised the mug to his lips, pretended to take a long sip, and made an appreciative sound. In reality, he barely let the liquid touch his mouth. When Jennifer's back was turned, he poured half the mug into the potted plant beside the table. A fern that had been looking suspiciously droopy lately, he now realized. Over the next 15 minutes, Chris performed an Academy Award-worthy act. He pretended to drink the tea while actually disposing of it in plant pots, down the sink when he went to wash his hands, and once desperately into a glass he then hid behind the bread box. By the time Jennifer checked on him, the mug was empty. "Feeling any better?" she asked, her eyes scanning his face with what looked like clinical interest. "A little," Chris lied, "but I'm exhausted. I might turn in early tonight." "That's probably a good idea," Jennifer said. And was it his imagination, or did she look pleased? By 8 o'clock, Chris made a show of yawning repeatedly. His usual bedtime had apparently become 8:30, right when Jennifer said the pills knocked him out. Tonight, he was going to give her exactly what she expected. "I can barely keep my eyes open," he mumbled, stretching elaborately. "I think I'm going to crash." "Go ahead, honey," Jennifer said, not even looking up from her phone. "I'll be up in a bit." Chris climbed the stairs to their bedroom, changed into his pajamas, and slid under the covers. He set his phone to silent, positioned it under his pillow where he could feel it vibrate, and closed his eyes. Then he waited. 20 minutes later, he heard Jennifer's footsteps on the stairs. She entered the bedroom, and he felt her presence beside the bed. He kept his breathing deep and even, the way he'd practiced in the car earlier. She said his name softly. "Chris? Chris, are you awake?" He didn't respond. After a moment, he heard her leave the room. What happened over the next 3 hours made Chris question everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and his own judgment. At first, Jennifer simply moved around downstairs. He heard the television turn on, heard her walking between rooms, heard the familiar sounds of her evening routine. But around 9:30, her phone rang, and Chris crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "He's out," Jennifer said, "completely unconscious. We're good to talk." Chris's hands clenched into fists as he strained to hear. "I know it seems cruel," Jennifer continued, her voice carrying clearly up the stairwell. "But Chris is so straight-laced, so obsessed with doing everything by the book. He'd never agree to what we need to do. This is the only way." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "The house is worth about $420,000, Jennifer said. "We bought it for $310 5 years ago. I've been making sure all the mortgage payments come from the joint account, so I can claim I contributed equally. His retirement account has about $200,000 in it. Plus there's the savings, another $70,000. Chris felt like he'd been punched in the gut. She was planning to divorce him and calculating her take. "No, he has no idea," Jennifer laughed. "Honestly, for a financial analyst, he's incredibly naive about what's happening in his own house. He thinks I'm working late when I'm with you. He thinks these headaches are from work stress. He has no clue I've been crushing up Ambien and putting it in his nightly tea for 2 months. 2 months. Chris had been drugged for 2 months. The lawyer says we need to establish a pattern of me being the primary homemaker for the past year to maximize my settlement," Jennifer continued. "That's why I've been documenting everything, taking photos of me cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, building a narrative that I've sacrificed my career to support his. The fact that my commission checks have been direct deposited into my private account helps. As far as the court will know, I've barely been working." Chris's vision blurred with rage. She'd been planning this for at least a year, possibly longer. "Once we get the settlement, we can be together openly," Jennifer said, her voice turning soft in a way that used to make Chris's heart melt. Now it made him nauseous. "We'll have enough to buy that condo downtown you wanted. Chris will be so blindsided he won't even know how to fight it. By the time he figures out what's happening, the divorce will be final, and I'll have my share of everything." They talked for another 20 minutes, and with each passing second, Chris learned more about the elaborate scheme his wife had constructed. She'd been having an affair with someone named David for over a year. David worked in commercial real estate. Jennifer had met him through work. They'd been planning this divorce strategically, consulting with a lawyer friend of David's who'd coached them on how to maximize Jennifer's payout. The sleeping pills served multiple purposes. They kept Chris compliant and unaware, prevented him from noticing Jennifer's late-night phone calls and unexplained absences, and established a pattern that Jennifer could potentially use to claim Chris had dependency issues or health problems that made him an unreliable spouse. When Jennifer finally ended the call, Chris crept back to bed, his mind spinning with betrayal and fury. But beneath the anger, something else was forming. A plan. Chris Talley might have been naive, but he was also very, very good with numbers, patterns, and strategy. Jennifer had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated him. She thought he was a clueless fool who'd roll over and accept whatever she decided to do. She had no idea what was coming. Chris lay in the dark, listening to Jennifer move around downstairs, and began cataloging everything he knew. He worked in finance. He understood money trails, documentation, and legal frameworks better than most people. He had skills Jennifer didn't even know he possessed. They had no idea what he was capable of when pushed. Around 11 o'clock, Jennifer came to bed. She slid under the covers beside him, and Chris had to force himself not to recoil from her touch. She curled against his back like she had 1,000 times before and whispered, "Sleep well, Chris." It took every ounce of self-control he possessed not to confront her right then. But Chris knew that emotional reactions led to poor outcomes. He needed to be smart. He needed to be strategic. The next morning, Chris woke at his usual 6 o'clock and went through his normal routine. He showered, dressed, ate the breakfast Jennifer prepared, and accepted his morning coffee without hesitation. He'd been paying attention, and she only drugged the evening tea. He kissed her goodbye and headed to work like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. At his office, Chris sat down at his computer and started researching. North Carolina was an equitable distribution state, but fault could matter in divorce proceedings. Adultery was still grounds for divorce in North Carolina, and it could impact alimony awards. More importantly, any assets acquired through fraud or deception during the marriage could be challenged. Chris opened a private browser window and began looking up divorce attorneys. Not just any attorneys, the best ones in Charlotte. He made a list of 5 names, all partners at prestigious firms with reputations for aggressive representation. Then he did something that would have seemed paranoid just 24 hours earlier. He checked his phone for tracking apps. Jennifer had always been somewhat controlling about knowing his whereabouts, claiming it was just because she worried about him. He thought it was sweet. Now he wondered if it was surveillance. Sure enough, he found an app he didn't recognize buried in his phone's settings. She'd been tracking his location. Chris disabled it without deleting it. He didn't want her to know he'd found it. Then he went to the Verizon store during his lunch break and bought a second phone, a prepaid device he registered under his middle name. This would be his real phone. The one Jennifer tracked would show only what he wanted her to see. Over the next week, Chris became 2 people. There was the Chris that Jennifer saw, the tired, headache-prone husband who drank his drugged tea every evening and fell asleep by 8:30. And there was the real Chris, the one who pretended to drink the tea, poured it out when she wasn't looking, and then lay in bed with his eyes closed while documenting everything his wife said and did. He started small. On Wednesday, he set up a tiny recording device in the kitchen, hidden inside the decorative rooster on top of the refrigerator. On Thursday, he opened a new bank account at a different institution and began quietly moving money in small increments that wouldn't trigger Jennifer's attention. On Friday, he met with Margaret Miller, a divorce attorney whose reputation for methodical, devastating case preparation had earned her a spot on Charlotte's top legal minds list for 3 consecutive years. Margaret listened to Chris's story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When he finished, she sat back in her leather chair and studied him. "You understand that what your wife is doing constitutes fraud," Margaret said. The drugging alone is criminal, but it also undermines any claim she might make about being an equal partner in the marriage. I want to document everything, Chris said. I want irrefutable proof of the affair, the drugging, the hidden income, all of it. That's going to take time, Margaret warned, and it's going to be emotionally difficult. You'll have to continue pretending everything is normal while we build the case. I can do that, Chris said. He thought about Jennifer curled up beside him each night, whispering sweet words while poison coursed through his veins from the pills she'd given him. I can do whatever it takes. Margaret nodded slowly. Then let's make sure Jennifer Talley regrets ever underestimating you. That weekend, Chris suggested to Jennifer that they have dinner with his parents on Sunday. Jennifer hated his parents. She found them boring and provincial, though she'd never said it quite that bluntly. But she agreed readily enough, probably thrilled to have Chris out of the house and unconscious early so she could talk freely with David. Except Chris didn't drink the tea that night either. And instead of falling asleep, he used the recording app on his new phone to capture Jennifer's 2-hour conversation with her lover, a conversation in which she detailed their plans with perfect clarity. By Monday morning, Chris had recordings of 5 separate phone calls, each one more damning than the last. He had Jennifer on tape discussing how to hide her income, how to manipulate the divorce proceedings, and most critically, how she'd been systematically drugging her husband for months. Margaret Miller reviewed the recordings and smiled. This is even better than I hoped. But we need more. We need proof of the affair, photos if possible. We need documentation of her hidden accounts. And we need to secure your assets before she realizes you know. Tell me what to do, Chris said. Over the next 10 days, Chris Talley became someone he barely recognized. He hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Robert Torres, who specialized in marital infidelity cases. He opened new accounts and began legally protecting assets that were solely his from before the marriage. He documented every dollar Jennifer spent from their joint account, every commission check she deposited into her private account, every lie she told about where she was going, and every single night he pretended to drink the drug tea and listened to his wife plan his destruction. Robert Torres came through on day 8. He provided Chris with photos of Jennifer and David together at a downtown condo, the same one Jennifer had mentioned wanting to buy. The photos were explicit enough to leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship. She's been staying there twice a week, Robert reported, always on nights when she tells you she's showing properties to clients. The condo is actually in David's name. He bought it 6 months ago. Chris studied the photos, feeling nothing. The hurt had burned away, leaving only cold determination. There's something else, Robert said carefully. Your wife withdrew $15,000 from your joint savings account last month. It's not on your monthly statements because she had the statements redirected to a P.O. box you don't know about. Can you prove it? Chris asked. I can prove all of it, Robert said. That's what you're paying me for. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Chris should do next. On day 14, Chris decided it was time. He had enough evidence to bury Jennifer in court. He had protected his assets, documented her fraud, and prepared for every possible countermove she might make. Most importantly, he'd done it all while she believed he was sleeping soundly under the influence of the pills she'd been feeding him. That evening, Chris went through his usual routine. He came home, accepted the drug tea, and pretended to drink it while Jennifer's back was turned. He feigned exhaustion and headed upstairs at 8:15, even earlier than usual. You feeling okay? Jennifer asked, and Chris could hear the false concern in her voice. Just tired, he mumbled. Long day. Sleep well, honey, she said, and Chris detected the faintest note of triumph in her tone. He went to the bedroom, changed into his pajamas, and got into bed. He closed his eyes and waited. At 8:45, Jennifer's phone rang downstairs. Chris crept to the hallway and listened. He's out, Jennifer said. Listen, I've been thinking. I want to file next month. I'm ready to be done with this charade. Chris felt a surge of satisfaction. Next month she wanted to file, but he'd be filing first thing Monday morning. I know we said we'd wait until spring, but I can't do this anymore, Jennifer continued. Living with him, pretending I care, watching him shuffle around like a zombie every night from those pills. It's exhausting. She paused, listening. The lawyer says I should get at least half of everything, probably more given that I can claim I've been the homemaker. Chris is too nice to fight dirty. He'll probably just accept whatever terms I offer because he hates conflict. Chris smiled in the darkness. She was so wrong. I love you too, Jennifer said softly. Just a few more weeks and we can stop hiding. After she hung up, Chris waited another hour, then crept downstairs. Jennifer was asleep on the couch, the television playing softly. He moved silently through the house, checking one last time to make sure he had everything he needed. In Jennifer's home office, tucked in a locked desk drawer that Chris had learned to pick open with the help of a YouTube tutorial, he found a folder labeled D. Inside were printouts of emails between Jennifer and David, discussing their plans in explicit detail. There were also bank statements for Jennifer's private account, the one Chris wasn't supposed to know about, showing deposits totaling over $90,000 in commission income she'd hidden. Chris photographed every page with his phone, careful not to disturb the arrangement. Jennifer would never know he'd been here. As he slipped back upstairs, Chris felt something close to peace. The betrayal still hurt. It probably always would. But he'd done what needed to be done. He'd protected himself, documented everything, and prepared for war. Jennifer thought she was facing a man too weak to fight back. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Monday morning arrived with crisp December sunshine, and Chris Talley woke up next to his wife with a calm sense of purpose he hadn't felt in 2 weeks. Jennifer was still asleep, her face peaceful in the early light, completely unaware that her carefully constructed plan was about to implode. Chris went through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, shave, dress in his charcoal suit, the one that made him look particularly professional. He needed to look like someone in control today, someone who made strategic decisions. Jennifer emerged from the bedroom around 7, yawning and stretching. "You're up early," she commented, padding into the kitchen where Chris was making coffee. "Big day at work," Chris said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He was taking a personal day, but Jennifer didn't need to know that. "I might be late getting home. Don't wait up." "Sure, honey," Jennifer said absently, already scrolling through her phone. Probably texting David, Chris thought with detached interest. "I have a showing this evening anyway." "No, you don't," Chris thought. "You have a date at David's condo." But he just smiled and kissed her cheek. "Have a good day." At exactly 9 o'clock, Chris walked into Margaret Miller's office on the 14th floor of the Epicenter building downtown. Margaret's paralegal, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, greeted him with a knowing nod and ushered him into the conference room. Margaret was already there, surrounded by folders, printouts, and her ever-present yellow legal pad. She looked up when Chris entered and gestured to the chair across from her. "Are you ready to do this?" she asked. Chris thought about the past 2 weeks, the lies, the drugged tea, the whispered phone calls planning his financial ruin. He thought about Jennifer curled against him each night, playing the role of loving wife while plotting with her lover. "I'm ready," he said. "Good, let's review what we have." For the next 90 minutes, they went through the evidence piece by piece. The recordings of Jennifer discussing her plans, the photos Robert Torres had taken of Jennifer and David at the condo, the bank statements showing hidden income, the documentation of the sleeping pills. Margaret had even retained a toxicologist who could testify about the dangers of unknowing Ambien consumption. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of marital fraud I've seen," Margaret said, shaking her head. "The drugging alone is criminal. We could pursue charges if you wanted." "I don't want her in prison," Chris said carefully. "I just want her out of my life with as little of my money as possible." That we can definitely arrange, Margaret said with a thin smile. North Carolina allows for fault-based divorce. Adultery is grounds, and when we add in the fraud, the hidden income, the systematic drugging, Jennifer isn't going to get the settlement she's been planning for. She slid a document across the table. This is the divorce petition. We're filing this afternoon. Given the evidence of adultery and fraud, we're also requesting a restraining order preventing Jennifer from accessing or depleting marital assets pending the divorce proceedings. Chris scanned the document. It was comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely devastating. It laid out every detail of Jennifer's behavior, every lie, every manipulation. She's going to be served tomorrow morning at her office, Margaret continued. I recommend you not be home when that happens. In fact, I recommend you move out today and stay somewhere safe, your parents' house, a hotel, wherever. Once Jennifer realizes what's happening, there's no telling how she'll react. Chris had already thought about this. I've booked a suite at the Hilton Uptown, month-to-month lease. I moved most of my personal belongings there over the weekend, while Jennifer was at David's place. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You've been busy. You said to be prepared. I did, and you've exceeded expectations. Margaret closed the folder in front of her. One more thing. We're going to freeze the joint accounts and credit cards this afternoon as well. The restraining order gives us authority to do that given the evidence of hidden assets. Jennifer won't be able to access any marital funds until the court sorts out what belongs to whom. What about her private account? Chris asked. The one with $90,000 in it? That's going to be a problem for her, Margaret said with satisfaction. In North Carolina, income earned during the marriage is marital property, regardless of whose name is on the account. She hid that income, thinking it would protect it. Instead, she's going to have to explain to a judge why she concealed nearly $100,000 from her spouse. That's fraud, and it's going to impact the distribution significantly. Chris felt a weight lift from his chest. He'd been so worried that Jennifer's scheming would work, that he'd be the one left financially devastated. But Margaret Miller was showing him that the truth, backed by solid evidence, was a powerful weapon. There's one other element we should discuss, Margaret said, her voice turning more serious. Your wife has been committing a crime, drugging you without consent. I need to know if you want to pursue criminal charges. The district attorney would absolutely take this case given the evidence. Chris considered it. The idea of Jennifer facing criminal consequences was tempting, but it was also complicated. A criminal trial would be public, lengthy, and emotionally draining. Not right now, he said finally, but I want the option held in reserve. If Jennifer tries to fight dirty, if she tries to lie or manipulate the proceedings, then yes, I want her to know that criminal charges are on the table. Margaret made a note. Smart. We'll include language in our filing that makes it clear you're aware of the criminal nature of her actions and reserving the right to pursue charges. That should keep her honest. By noon, the divorce petition was filed with the Mecklenburg County Clerk of Court. By 2 o'clock, the restraining order on marital assets was in place. By 4 o'clock, Chris had officially moved into his hotel suite, a clean, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He stood at those windows as the sun set, his phone in his hand, waiting. Jennifer's office closed at 5:30. She'd be heading to David's condo around 6, and she'd still have no idea that tomorrow morning, a process server would be waiting for her with papers that would destroy everything she'd been planning. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Running late, don't wait up for me. Love you. Chris didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, Chris was in Margaret's office when Patricia burst in, grinning. She's been served. The process server just called. Apparently, she opened the papers in front of 3 colleagues and went white as a sheet. Any reaction? Margaret asked. She tried calling Chris immediately. When he didn't answer, she called David. Then she tried the joint bank accounts. Patricia's grin widened. That's when she discovered they were frozen. Chris's phone had been buzzing in his pocket for the past 10 minutes. He'd been ignoring it. Now he pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from Jennifer, along with a string of increasingly frantic text messages. "Marcus, call me right now. What is this? Did you file for divorce? This is insane. Call me. We need to talk. Why are the accounts frozen? This is illegal. Marcus, please, let's talk about this like adults." Margaret read the messages over his shoulder and snorted. "Talk like adults? That's rich, coming from someone who's been drugging her husband for 2 months." Chris powered off his phone. "What happens now?" "Now Jennifer gets her own lawyer, and they respond to our petition. Given the evidence, I expect her attorney will recommend she settle quickly and quietly. If this goes to trial, everything comes out publicly. The affair, the drugging, the hidden income. That's not going to look good for her, especially in her profession. Real estate agents live and die by their reputation. How long until we know her response?" "She has 30 days to file an answer, but I expect we'll hear from her lawyer much sooner than that. The evidence is too damaging. No competent attorney would advise her to fight this." Margaret was right. Within 48 hours, Chris received a call from a lawyer named Richard Brennan, who represented Jennifer. "Mr. Talley," Brennan said in a measured voice, "I've reviewed the petition your attorney filed, and I've spoken extensively with Mrs. Talley about the allegations. I'll be frank with you. This is an extremely difficult case from my client's perspective. The evidence you've compiled is substantial." "That's because it's all true," Chris said flatly. "Yes, well," Brennan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Talley is understandably distressed. She's asked me to explore the possibility of a settlement that would avoid protracted litigation." "I'm listening." "She's prepared to accept a divorce on your terms, with minimal asset distribution, provided that you agree not to pursue criminal charges related to the, sleeping medication incident." Chris almost laughed. Jennifer was willing to walk away with almost nothing as long as she didn't face criminal prosecution. It was exactly what Margaret had predicted. "I need to consult with my attorney," Chris said. "We'll be in touch." He hung up and immediately called Margaret, who cackled when he relayed the conversation. "She's terrified," Margaret said gleefully, "and she should be. Let's make an offer. We'll agree not to pursue criminal charges if she signs over her interest in the marital home, accepts a minimal share of the retirement accounts, and agrees to a full accounting of all her hidden income." "What does that mean in dollar terms?" Chris asked. "It means you keep the house, worth about $420,000, minus the mortgage balance of about $240. You keep your full retirement account, $200,000. You keep the marital savings account, $70,000. And Jennifer has to declare her private account as marital property, which means you get half, $45,000. Chris did the mental math. He'd be walking away from the marriage with significant assets intact, while Jennifer would get maybe 10% of what she'd been planning to take. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Chris's situation. "There's one more thing I want," Chris said. "I want her to sign a statement admitting to the affair and the drugging. Something in writing, notarized, that I can keep as insurance." "That's ambitious," Margaret said, "but given her fear of criminal prosecution, she might agree to it. Let me reach out to Brennan." The negotiations took another week. Jennifer's lawyer pushed back on several points, but ultimately the evidence was too strong. Jennifer had no leverage. On a cold Friday afternoon in mid-December, just 3 weeks after Chris had first discovered the sleeping pills in his tea, both parties signed the settlement agreement. Chris got everything he'd asked for: the house, his retirement account, most of the savings, and half of Jennifer's hidden income. In exchange, he agreed not to pursue criminal charges. But the real victory was the notarized statement Jennifer had to sign. In careful legal language, it acknowledged her affair with David Monroe, her systematic drugging of Chris, and her attempts to defraud him during the divorce proceedings. It was a document that would follow her forever. Insurance against any future lies or manipulations. Margaret shook Chris's hand in her office after the papers were signed. That was one of the most satisfying cases I've handled in years. You did everything right. You documented, you stayed calm, and you didn't let emotion cloud your judgment. I learned from the best, Chris said. What are you going to do now? Chris thought about it. The house felt empty without Jennifer, though perhaps it had always been empty, and he'd just been too blind to see it. The marriage he'd believed in had been a fiction for longer than he wanted to admit. I'm going to sell the house, he said finally. Too many bad memories. I'll find something smaller, something that's just mine. And I'm going to focus on work, on rebuilding my life. What about dating? Margaret asked with a slight smile. Chris laughed, but it was hollow. Eventually, but not for a while. I need to figure out how I missed all the signs, how I let myself be fooled for so long. Don't beat yourself up, Margaret said gently. People who want to deceive you will find a way. That's on them, not you. Chris nodded, but he wasn't sure he believed it. He'd spent 2 months being drugged and hadn't noticed. He'd spent a year being cheated on and hadn't suspected. There had to be something he could have done differently. That weekend, Chris began the process of packing up the house. He'd already accepted an offer, a young couple expecting their first child, excited about the neighborhood and the good schools. They reminded him of himself and Jennifer 7 years ago, full of hope and plans. He hoped they'd be smarter than he'd been. While packing Jennifer's old office, Chris found something that made him pause. It was a photo album from their wedding, filled with pictures of that perfect spring day. Jennifer in her white dress, Chris in his tuxedo, both of them smiling like they'd won the lottery. Had she loved him then? Or had it always been an act? He'd never know, and that was perhaps the hardest part. The woman he'd married was a stranger, and he couldn't even pinpoint when the transformation had occurred. Or maybe there had been no transformation at all. Maybe he'd simply never known her. Chris closed the album and placed it in a box marked donation. Someone else could have those memories. He didn't want them. His phone rang, unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Chris Talley? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Angela Morrison. I'm a friend of David Monroe's ex-wife, Carla. I heard about your divorce, and I think we should talk. Chris's pulse quickened. About what? About the fact that what happened to you is exactly what happened to Carla 2 years ago. David has a pattern, and I think Jennifer might have done this before too, with her first husband. Chris sat down heavily on a box of books. Her first husband? You didn't know she was married before you? Angela sounded surprised. She was married to a guy named Ryan Webb from 22 to 24. It was a short marriage that ended in a messy divorce. Ryan claimed she'd been unfaithful, but he could never prove it. He walked away with almost nothing. Chris felt sick. Jennifer had told him she'd never been married before. Another lie in an ocean of lies. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because Carla deserves to know she wasn't alone. Because other people should know what Jennifer and David are capable of. And because, Angela paused, because I think they're going to do it again. I saw them at a restaurant last week with another couple. David was very friendly with the other woman, and Jennifer was chatting up the other woman's husband. It looked like they were setting up the same play. Chris closed his eyes. Of course they were. Jennifer had gotten away with it once with Ryan. She'd almost gotten away with it with Chris. Why would she stop? What do you want me to do? Chris asked. I want you to meet with Carla and Ryan. I want you to share your stories. And then I want you to decide if you're willing to warn the next potential victims. Chris thought about it. The divorce was over. He'd gotten his settlement. He could walk away, focus on rebuilding his life, and never think about Jennifer Talley again. But that would mean letting her do this to someone else. Set up the meeting, Chris said. 3 days later, Chris sat in a coffee shop on South Boulevard across from 2 people who felt like mirrors of his own experience. Carla Monroe was a petite woman in her early 30s with tired eyes that held echoes of betrayal. Ryan Webb was a tall, broad-shouldered man about Chris's age who carried himself with the careful control of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "David drugged you too?" Chris asked Carla, and she nodded. "Sleeping pills in my nightly tea. Same as you. I thought I was going crazy. I'd be exhausted by 8 every night. Couldn't figure out why. It wasn't until after the divorce that I found the pills hidden in his bathroom cabinet and put it together." "How long?" Chris asked. 4 months. He was having an affair with a client, planning the divorce, trying to hide assets. Sound familiar? It did. Too familiar. Ryan's story was different but equally disturbing. "Jennifer told me she'd never been married before. We met when I was 25, she was 22. She seemed perfect, sweet, supportive, ambitious. We got married after dating for a year. The marriage lasted 2 years." "What happened?" Chris asked. "She had an affair with a client, some hotshot real estate developer. Started pulling away, claiming I was too controlling when I asked about her late nights. When I finally figured it out and confronted her, she turned it around on me. Made me out to be the bad guy, the jealous husband who didn't trust her. I ended up settling the divorce just to get away from the drama. Gave her half of everything I'd saved, even though she'd been the one who cheated." "Did she drug you?" Chris asked. "Not that I know of, but there were times I felt off, confused, tired for no reason. I always attributed it to stress from the marriage, but now I wonder." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, united by their shared experience of being deceived by people they'd loved. "Angela said you think they're targeting another couple," Chris said finally. Carla nodded. "The Hendersons, Michael and Ashley, young couple, married 3 years, both working in finance. They met Jennifer and David at some networking event, and now they're all friendly, having dinners together, couples game nights. I've seen the photos on social media." "And you think Jennifer and David are setting them up?" "I know they are," Carla said flatly. "It's the exact same pattern. Befriend the couple, get close, then each of them targets one spouse. David goes after the wife, Jennifer goes after the husband. They break up both marriages, take what they can, and move on to the next victims." "That's sociopathic," Chris said. "Yes," Ryan agreed. "It is, and they're very good at it." "So what do we do?" Chris asked. "We can't just let them destroy another couple's lives." Carla pulled out her phone and showed Chris a screenshot. It was a text conversation between someone named Ashley and Carla. "Ashley, Carla, this is going to sound weird, but do you know David Monroe?" Carla, "I used to be married to him. Why?" Ashley, "He and his girlfriend Jennifer have been hanging out with me and my husband. They seem nice, but something feels off. I found your name in some old emails on David's laptop when I was helping him with something for work. It said you were his ex-wife. I just wanted to ask, is he a good person? Should I trust him?" Chris looked up. "She reached out to you?" "Yesterday," Carla confirmed. "She's already suspicious. She just doesn't know what she's suspicious of yet." "We have to tell her," Chris said. "We have to tell them both, Ashley and Michael, before it's too late." "I agree," Ryan said, "but we need to be smart about it. If we just show up and make accusations, they might not believe us. Jennifer and David are very charming. They're good at making other people look crazy." "What if we show them the evidence?" Chris suggested. "I have recordings of Jennifer planning the divorce. I have photos of her with David. I have the notarized statement where she admits to everything. And I have David's pattern documented," Carla added. "The affairs, the drugging, the financial manipulation. It's all there." "We should meet with them," Ryan said. "The Hendersons. Lay it all out. Give them the information and let them make their own choice." Chris thought about it. A month ago, if someone had approached him with stories about Jennifer being a serial manipulator, would he have believed them? Or would he have dismissed them as bitter exes with an agenda? He honestly didn't know. But he knew one thing. The Hendersons deserved the truth. What they did with it was up to them. "Let's do it," Chris said. The meeting with Michael and Ashley Henderson took place on a Tuesday evening at a neutral location, a private room at a restaurant in South End that Carla had reserved. Chris arrived early, carrying a folder thick with evidence he'd never thought he'd have to use again. Ryan and Carla were already there, looking as nervous as Chris felt. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. How did you tell two strangers that the couple they'd been befriending were actually predators targeting their marriage? Michael and Ashley arrived together, and Chris's first thought was how young they looked. Mid-20s, maybe 27 at most. Ashley was a petite brunette with sharp, intelligent eyes. Michael was tall and athletic, with the confident bearing of someone who'd never had reason to doubt the world. They were about to get a brutal education. "Thank you for meeting with us," Carla began once everyone was seated. "I know Angela's message was vague, but we thought this was important enough to discuss in person." "She said it was about David and Jennifer," Ashley said, her voice cautious, "that they might not be who they seem to be." "They're not," Chris said bluntly. There was no easy way to do this, so he went with honesty. "They're con artists who target married couples, break up the marriages, and profit from the divorces." Michael's expression turned skeptical. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," Ryan agreed, "and I know how it sounds, but all three of us have experienced it firsthand. I was married to Jennifer 8 years ago. Carla was married to David, and Chris just finalized his divorce from Jennifer 3 weeks ago." Ashley's eyes widened. "Wait, Jennifer was married before Chris? She told us he was her first husband." "That was the first lie," Chris said. "There were many more." Over the next 90 minutes, the three of them laid it all out. Ryan talked about his marriage to Jennifer and how it had imploded when she'd had an affair with a developer who'd helped her advance her career. Carla talked about David's pattern of drugging her, having affairs, and manipulating divorce proceedings to maximize his payout. And Chris told them everything: the sleeping pills in his tea, the recordings of Jennifer planning his financial destruction, the photos of her with David at the condo, the hidden income, all of it. He passed the folder across the table. "This is evidence from my divorce. Recordings, photos, bank statements, and a notarized confession where Jennifer admits to everything. I'm showing you this because I wish someone had warned me before I married her." Ashley opened the folder with trembling hands. Her face went white as she looked through the contents: photos of Jennifer and David together, transcripts of recorded phone calls, bank statements showing hidden accounts. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Michael, look at this." Michael took the folder and read in silence, his jaw clenched tighter with each page. "This screenshot," Ashley said, pointing to one of the documents. "This text conversation between Jennifer and David. They're talking about us." Chris leaned forward to look. Sure enough, there was a screenshot he'd forgotten he had. A conversation between Jennifer and David that he'd captured from her phone during one of his evidence-gathering sessions. Jennifer: "The Hendersons are perfect, young, successful, trusting. Ashley's already confiding in me about her marriage issues." David: "Michael mentioned he's frustrated with Ashley's work hours. Classic opening." Jennifer: "Same play as before? I work on Michael, you work on Ashley?" David: "Why mess with a winning formula?" Ashley pushed away from the table, looking like she might be sick. "They've been planning this. They've been targeting us." "I'm afraid so," Carla said gently. "The friendship, the dinners, the trust they've been building, it's all strategy. They're setting up the same situation they've created 3 times before that we know of." "Probably more," Ryan added darkly. "These are just the cases we can document." Michael was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "How did I not see this? The late-night text Jennifer sent me, the way David was always encouraging Ashley to go out with him for drinks after work. I thought they were just being friendly." "That's what they count on," Chris said. "They're experts at making you feel special, making you feel like they're your friends. And then they use that trust to destroy your life." Ashley looked up at Chris, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Thank you for telling us. I know this couldn't have been easy, sharing all of this with strangers. It wasn't, Chris admitted. But I couldn't let them do to you what they did to me, what they've done to all of us. What should we do? Michael asked. Just cut them off? They're going to ask why. Tell them the truth, Carla suggested. Tell them you know what they are and what they were planning. Let them know they picked the wrong targets this time. Won't that just make them move on to someone else? Ashley asked. Probably, Ryan said, but at least you'll be safe. And maybe if enough people know about them, if enough people share their stories, Jennifer and David will find it harder to operate. Chris had been thinking about this for days. I have another idea. What if we go public? Not in a messy, dramatic way, but what if we compile all the evidence we have, all 3 cases, and present it as a pattern? We could file a formal complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Jennifer's license would be at risk. We could contact David's employer, show them what he's been doing, make it harder for them to keep targeting people. That's nuclear, Ryan said slowly, but I like it. They've destroyed 3 marriages that we know of, Chris said, his voice hard. They drugged people, committed fraud, broke up families. Why should they get to keep doing it? Carla nodded. I'm in. I should have done something like this years ago. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't have had to go through this, Chris. You can't blame yourself for what they did, Chris said, but we can make sure they don't do it again. The group talked for another hour, strategizing. By the end of the evening, they had a plan. Michael and Ashley would confront Jennifer and David, making it clear they knew about the scheme. Meanwhile, Chris, Ryan, and Carla would work on compiling a comprehensive report documenting the pattern of behavior. 2 days later, Michael called Chris with an update. We met with Jennifer and David for dinner last night, told them we knew everything. How did they react? David tried to deny it at first, claimed it was all a misunderstanding from bitter ex-spouses, but when Ashley showed him the screenshots of his own text messages, he shut down. Jennifer started crying, saying she'd changed, that what she did to you was a mistake she regretted. Chris snorted. She regrets getting caught. That's what I told her, Michael said with grim satisfaction. Then I asked her why, if she regretted it so much, she was planning to do the exact same thing to us. She didn't have an answer for that. Are they still together? As far as I know, but here's the interesting part. David's wife, his current wife, I mean. Wait, Chris interrupted. David's married? Oh, you didn't know? Yeah, he married someone new about 6 months after his divorce from Carla. Woman named Stephanie, works in marketing. From what I understand, he met her while he was still with Jennifer. Chris's mind reeled. David had been cheating on Jennifer while they were planning to cheat together. It was almost poetic. Anyway, Michael continued, I did some digging. Stephanie has no idea about David's pattern. She thinks he's a devoted husband who was wronged by his ex-wife. Someone should tell her, Chris said. I agree. Want to do the honors? Chris thought about it. He'd already blown up his own life and helped save the Hendersons' marriage. Did he want to get involved in yet another mess? But then he thought about Stephanie, whoever she was, living in ignorant bliss with a man who was probably already planning her destruction. Send me her contact information, Chris said. Meeting Stephanie Monroe was like looking at a version of himself from 6 months ago. Hopeful, trusting, completely unaware that the person sleeping beside her each night was a monster. She agreed to meet Chris at a Starbucks near her office. Curious about why a stranger wanted to talk about her husband, Chris brought the folder. He was getting very practiced at this conversation. Your husband has a pattern, Chris began without preamble. He targets married women, has affairs with them, and helps them plan divorces where they maximize their financial payout. He's done it at least 3 times that I can document, and he's probably already planning to do it to you. Stephanie's perfectly made-up face went through a series of expressions. Disbelief, anger, and finally, horrible recognition. The business trips, she said quietly. The late nights, The way he's always texting someone he claims is a client. It's not a client, Chris said gently. It's probably Jennifer Talley, his most recent partner. Or maybe someone new, I don't know, but I know the pattern. He showed her everything. The evidence from his own divorce, Carla's testimony, the screenshots of David planning to target the Hendersons. Stephanie read it all with trembling hands. "I'm 3 months pregnant," she said finally, her voice hollow. "We just found out last week." David was so happy, or at least he seemed happy. Was that fake too? Chris felt a surge of anger toward David Monroe. A pregnant wife at home while he was out planning his next conquest. It was despicable. "I don't know if his happiness was fake," Chris said honestly. "I don't know David well enough to say, but I know he's capable of compartmentalizing his life in ways that most people can't. He can have a pregnant wife at home and still be plotting with his mistress. Those two things don't contradict each other in his mind." "What should I do?" Stephanie asked, and Chris heard the desperation in her voice. "That's not my decision to make," Chris said. "But if I were you, I'd protect myself. Get a lawyer, document everything, check your financial accounts, and decide whether you can trust a man who's made a career out of deception." Stephanie nodded slowly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "Thank you for telling me. I know you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Chris said, "because nobody told me, and I wish they had." Over the next month, the dominoes fell rapidly. Stephanie hired a divorce attorney, coincidentally the same firm where Margaret Miller worked, though Stephanie was assigned to a different partner who specialized in complex marital cases involving infidelity and hidden assets. The Real Estate Commission launched an investigation into Jennifer based on the complaint Chris, Ryan, and Carla filed jointly. David's employer, a major commercial real estate firm, was less than thrilled to learn their senior broker had been using his position to target married clients for affairs. Chris watched it all from a distance, focusing on rebuilding his own life. He sold the house in January and moved into a modern townhouse in Plaza Midwood, a neighborhood he'd always liked but Jennifer had thought was too urban. He threw himself into work, earning a promotion to senior analyst. He started therapy to process the betrayal and figure out how he'd missed the warning signs. And slowly, day by day, he healed. On a cold Tuesday in February, almost 3 months after he'd first discovered the sleeping pills in his tea, Chris received a letter at his new address. It was from Jennifer. He almost threw it away unopened. What could she possibly have to say that he wanted to hear? But curiosity won out. He opened it. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages of Jennifer's familiar, looping script. "Chris," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why, but I need to say some things, and I need you to know that I mean them. What I did to you was unforgivable. I lied, I cheated, I drugged you, I planned to destroy you financially. There's no excuse for any of it. I could tell you about my childhood, about my father's affairs that destroyed my mother, about my first marriage and how Ryan's emotional abuse made me believe I deserved to take what I wanted. But those would just be excuses, and you deserve better than excuses. The truth is that somewhere along the way, I became the kind of person I used to despise. I became my father. I became someone who uses people, who lies as easily as breathing, who justifies cruelty as strategy. Losing you, losing everything, has forced me to look at who I've become. The Real Estate Commission suspended my license pending their investigation. David left me the day Stephanie filed for divorce, claiming I'd become too much of a liability. I'm living in a studio apartment and working as an administrative assistant to pay my bills. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to know that there have been consequences, real ones, and I'm glad. I deserved every single one. I'm in therapy now, real therapy, not the couples counseling I suggested we try when I was planning to use it as evidence that I tried to save our marriage. I'm working on understanding why I do what I do, why I hurt people who love me. My therapist says I might be a narcissist. Or maybe I just learned terrible patterns from my parents and never bothered to break them. Either way, I'm trying to change. Not because I think it will make you forgive me, I know that ship has sailed, but because I don't want to be this person anymore. I want you to know that what we had in the beginning was real, at least for me. I did love you, Chris. I loved your kindness, your stability, your fundamental goodness. And then I destroyed it all because I convinced myself I deserved more, deserved better, deserved whatever I wanted regardless of who got hurt. I'm sorry. I know those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. I'm sorry for the drugging, for the lies, for the betrayal. I'm sorry for making you doubt yourself and your judgment. I'm sorry for taking your trust and weaponizing it. You were a good husband. You deserved a better wife. I hope you're happy, Chris. I hope you find someone who actually deserves you. And I hope someday you can think about our marriage without feeling disgusted. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I just needed you to know that I know what I did, and I'm sorry. Jennifer. Chris read the letter 3 times, trying to decide how he felt about it. Was Jennifer genuinely remorseful? Or was this just another manipulation, another angle? He didn't know, and he realized with some relief that he didn't need to know. Jennifer's emotional state, her growth or lack thereof, her future, none of it was his problem anymore. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep it particularly, but not to immediately destroy it either. It was a piece of his history, a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. His phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. Beer tonight? Carla and I are celebrating. The Real Estate Commission formally revoked Jennifer's license today. Chris smiled. I'll be there. That evening, Chris sat in a brew pub in Noda with Ryan and Carla, raising a glass to small victories. Jennifer's license was gone. David had been demoted at his firm and was facing his own messy divorce. The Hendersons were in marriage counseling, working on the issues that Jennifer and David had tried to exploit, but they were together and stronger for it. What are you going to do now? Carla asked Chris. Any big plans? Chris thought about it. For 3 months, his life had been consumed by the divorce, by documentation and revenge and justice. But that chapter was closed now. I'm going to live, he said simply. I'm going to work on projects I care about. I'm going to travel. I've always wanted to see Ireland. I'm going to be more careful about who I trust, but I'm not going to stop trusting altogether. And eventually, when I'm ready, I'm going to date again. Carefully. That's a good plan, Ryan said. Better than spending years being bitter, which is what I did. We all processed it differently, Carla said philosophically. The important thing is we came out the other side. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment. You know what the weirdest part is? Chris said. I'm almost grateful this happened. Ryan and Carla both looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Hear me out, Chris continued. If Jennifer had just asked for a divorce, if she'd been honest about falling out of love or wanting something different, I would have been devastated. I would have spent years wondering what I did wrong, how I failed her. But because she was so calculating, so deliberately cruel, I don't have to wonder. I know exactly who she is, and I know the divorce had nothing to do with my worth as a person. It was always about her choices, her character, her willingness to hurt people for personal gain. That's actually a healthy way to look at it, Carla said thoughtfully. I wish I'd been able to see it that way sooner. It took me a while to get here, Chris admitted, and I had a lot of help from my therapist. But yeah, I'm grateful, because I'm free of someone who would have kept hurting me for years if I hadn't found out. And now I know what real betrayal looks like, so I'll be better at recognizing the warning signs. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Chris Talley? A woman's voice, warm and professional. Yes? My name is Dr. Sarah Miller. I'm a psychologist who specializes in narcissistic abuse and marital fraud. I read about your case, well, cases, plural, in a professional journal where Margaret Miller published an article about patterns of marital manipulation. I'm working on a book about this phenomenon, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to be interviewed. Your story could help other people recognize the warning signs. Chris glanced at Ryan and Carla, who were watching him with interest. He thought about all the victims Jennifer and David had left in their wake. He thought about the Hendersons and Stephanie and whoever else might be out there, unaware they were being targeted. "I'd be happy to help," he said. 6 months later, Chris stood in a bookstore in Charlotte, holding a copy of Dr. Sarah Miller's book, Married to a Stranger, Recognizing and Surviving Narcissistic Marital Fraud. His story was in Chapter 3, told with enough detail to be instructive, but with his name changed to protect his privacy. He'd read the chapter already, of course. Dr. Miller had sent him an advance copy, but seeing it in print, seeing his experience transformed into a cautionary tale that might help someone else, felt significant. His phone buzzed. A text from a number that wasn't stored in his contacts. "I saw the book. Thank you for helping other people avoid what I went through. Ashley Henderson." Chris smiled and typed back, "We all help each other. That's how we survive." He bought 3 copies of the book, one for himself, one for his parents, and one for his therapist, who'd helped him process everything and find his way back to trusting people again. As he left the bookstore, Chris thought about the past 8 months. The betrayal, the discovery, the strategic counterstrike, the slow process of healing. It had been the worst period of his life and also, strangely, one of the most educational. He'd learned that people could be crueler than he'd imagined, but also kinder. He'd learned that justice wasn't always dramatic or immediate, but it did come if you were patient and strategic. He'd learned that trusting people again after betrayal was terrifying, but necessary. Most importantly, he'd learned that he was stronger than he'd ever thought possible. Chris drove home to his townhouse, where his cat, a rescue tabby he'd adopted in March, was waiting. He'd named her Scout after the character in To Kill a Mockingbird because she was curious and brave and saw the world clearly. He fed Scout, made himself dinner, and settled onto his couch with a book. It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind Jennifer would have hated. She'd always needed excitement, drama, attention. Chris had learned to appreciate peace. His phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number, but this time he recognized the area code. Chicago. "Curious," he answered. "Chris Talley? My name is Kevin Phillips. I was married to a woman named Jennifer Webb 8 years ago, before she married you. My friend Ryan Webb, her second husband, gave me your number. I hope that's okay." Chris sat up straighter. "Jennifer Webb? Wait, there was a husband before Ryan?" "Yeah, I was the first one, as far as I know. Married her right out of college. She cheated on me with her boss, planned a strategic divorce, and walked away with half my savings. I've been following the case against her and David Monroe. I just wanted to thank you for finally stopping them." Chris felt a chill. 4 husbands. Jennifer had done this to 4 men, probably more. And she just kept refining her technique, getting better at it with each iteration. "Kevin," Chris said slowly, "how would you feel about going on record? There's a psychologist writing about patterns like this. Your story could help complete the picture." "I'd like that," Kevin said. "For a long time I thought I was the only one. It's good to know I'm not." They talked for another 30 minutes, comparing notes, sharing stories. When Chris hung up, he felt something he hadn't expected. Closure. Jennifer Talley, or Webb, or whatever her real name was, had hurt a lot of people. But those people had found each other, had shared their stories, had helped protect future victims. In trying to destroy them, she'd inadvertently created a network of people who understood manipulation and were committed to stopping it. That, Chris thought, was its own form of justice. Chris learned something profound in the months after his divorce. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's healing, growing, and using your experience to protect others. He could have spent years consumed by bitterness toward Jennifer. He could have made it his mission to destroy her life as thoroughly as she tried to destroy his. But instead, he chose to document what happened, share his story, and help other people recognize the warning signs of manipulation before it was too late. In doing so, he discovered something Jennifer would never understand. Real power doesn't come from controlling or using people. It comes from being someone others can trust, someone who makes the world slightly safer just by being in it. Jennifer had tried to make Chris a victim. Instead, she'd made him someone who ensured there would be fewer victims in the future. And that, Chris realized, was the sweetest victory of all. Not because Jennifer faced consequences, though she did, but because he'd transformed his worst experience into something that helped other people. He'd taken her cruelty and used it to create something good. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up teaching you just how strong you really are. And sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. Chris Talley had been married to a stranger, drugged by the woman he loved, and nearly destroyed by her betrayal. But he'd survived, grown stronger, and found purpose in helping others avoid the same fate. He'd learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, carefully, slowly, with the right people. That love without honesty was worthless. That character revealed itself not in the easy moments, but in how people behave when they thought no one was watching. And most importantly, he'd learned that he was enough. He didn't need someone like Jennifer to complete him. He was whole on his own, capable of building a good life filled with people who genuinely cared about him. The marriage was over. The betrayal was real. But Chris Talley was free, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. And that was worth more than any revenge could ever be. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.